Hey everyone, welcome to our first portion of our midterm review. As you know, we will be doing half and half. So, half will be during this session with me, and then the other half will take place um, in person on Thursday. So, today I'll be covering the chapter 11 and 12 in very specific sections because I don't want you to just simply read the whole thing. You don't have to do that. But the sections that you are charged to read and study are the blue numbers underneath the chapter name. Now, I know some of y'all like, duh, that makes sense, Dr. Mac. However, I discovered that that does not make sense to everyone. Everybody doesn't necessarily know that. So those numbers at the bottom of each of the days on the course schedule, those numbers are related to the specific sections that I want for you to read um, for that particular chapter. You're not reading everything, right? And so that's okay. But if you want to read it, make it happen. But you don't have to read the whole thing. So yeah, I just want to make sure that we know what we have to do in that regard. So your midterm again will open up on Friday. When it opens up on Friday, you will have the opportunity to you have the opportunity to take the exam again. It's multiple choice question. It's nothing major, and you will have to answer the questions. I believe as of right now, it's less than I think it's maybe 50. It's multiple choice, pretty easy, very similar to what you've already done in your on your quizzes. And so I just want to make sure that we are okay, that we're good, that we know exactly what is going to be asked of us. So in just a second, I'm going to pull up the chapter 11 file, the PDF. Remember, your PDFs are available for you in the they're available for you in the what do you call them? In the file section. Yeah, it's available for you in the file section. I am having unnecessary problems trying to pull up this document. It makes absolutely no sense. Hold on. All right. I should be able to just pull up what I want to pull up now. I don't understand. All right, give me just a second to see why it hasn't. I see now. That's why. All right, so chapter 11, the view that I'm showing you is just like this. Don't worry about it. I will put it inside slideshow view so that you can see. Chapter 11 is about Black men, and more specifically, them in the Civil War. Again, we don't cover all of the sections. We cover 11.1, 11.2, and 11.3. 11.1, 11.2, 11.3. 11.1 just talking about his primary goal, Lincoln's primary goal for um, uh, via the Civil War, his whole objective for the Civil War. Remember, we talked about the Civil War being called by those in the South the aggression from the North. Remember, we talked about that. His goal was not simply to abolish slavery for the sake of um, Black people being free, if that made any sense. The whole reason for abolishing slavery was more so because he believed that slavery corrupted those involved. The white men that were engaging in the slavery corrupted the Black people, not necessarily corrupted themselves, excuse me, their morals, not necessarily that it was wrong because of the humans that were involved in the process. And so keep that in mind. It's irritating for me to even say it. All right. And so talking about if Lincoln could have abolished slavery, because he had issues with slavery in terms of the moral aspect of it, he would have. And so remember the adding a state, slave state, and adding a free state. That was his attempt his party members attempt to sort of keep the issue of slavery kind of under wraps. What ends up happening when he is elected is he's, excuse me, he's elected, but with no southern states. He didn't have to use any of the southern states where slavery was a thing. And so because um, that power was made clear to the rest of the country, specifically the South, it ultimately led to the Civil War because in them seceding from the Union, the Southern states, and creating the Confederacy, it ultimately was we don't have any power in the Union anyway. We're basically going to be at the mercy of the Union. So we should go ahead and secede. So that's the idea of why the Southern states left. And of course, that's why slavery kind of gets put at the center because those Southern states wanted the right, excuse me, they wanted the right to continue enslavement. The states wanted states' rights so that states could decide whether or not they wanted to have slavery, not the federal government. And so, see, any policies concerning Black people were secondary? Absolutely. He did not necessarily view Black people as equals. He did not necessarily want to give Black people citizenship. So, if he could have figured out a way to do it, he would have. Remember, we talked about him proposing Black people move to Liberia and then move to Panama. Because again, there wasn't this thing of from him, this depiction of him as this honest, Abe, God-fearing man. Um, he may have feared God. I don't know which one, but he couldn't have feared the one that said that, that all men were created in his image, but that's neither there. But anyway, so this caricature of his personality toward Black people, attitudes toward Black people just wasn't the truth. And so again, white men are accepted, Black men are rejected. Um, Black men ended up, while they couldn't serve and fight, they ended up in some sort of ancillary roles, similar to what they would have been in terms of enslavement. So cooking and cleaning and readying materials, things of that nature. That was very quick. So 11.1 was good. Now we on 11.2. Look at that. All right, so describe the responses of African Americans to the breakout of the Civil War. Remember, there were some of the younger ones, both in the North and the South, but in terms of the North, even though they weren't directly dealing with slavery, they wanted to fight. And those are the ones that could not fight. Remember, we talked about the Massachusetts infantry, the 54th, and we talked about them. The movie Glory was about them. That shows you guys a clip from the movie. This is who the text is referring to here, where it said Black men in the North were prepared for war. They had to form their own military companies, etc., because they couldn't be a part of not company as in business, but company as in a group within a military fraction. So there were battalions, etc., but they were forming their own groups. And they wanted to fight in the war, which is what happened in Glory. Those men, there were some who had escaped, like who had self-emancipated, like Denzel Washington's character, but a lot of them were just men who were free, who were in the North. And so the different ways that they tried to say that they would help, etc., by inciting revolts. I'll respect the revolt part, even though I don't like the word slave. It's just me. All right, and so some of the issues that were there was, and I'll say it again, remember, enslavement was legal. It was a legal practice recognized by local governments, including city and state, but also recognized by the federal government. Yes, this war was the basis of the war was determining whether or not the practice would continue. But the practice was continuing regardless of what was happening in terms of fighting the war. So anyone who would self-emancipate or quote unquote run away was considered contraband, something that was illegal. So the way we would use the term contraband in this particular time frame, it's what someone might have when they are imprisoned and they're not supposed to have it. So contraband in some prisons could be cell phones. There are some who have some, but whatever. But it can be something as small as rubber bands, depending upon the rule. It can be maybe the rubber bands are too big or whatever. I know that seems odd, but it's along those lines. It can be that kind of stuff. They can't watch certain movies because they could incite, violence response, etc. And so those who had self-emancipated were considered contraband. So imagine if you were part of the North and your troop was moving from the northern states, moving south, and they would set up camp. And when they set up camp, people who had self-emancipated, their families and self they would show up like, "Hey, y'all with the union, bet we can stay. We want to be free." That kind of thing. And so it caused a lot of confusion because they didn't know what to do. Because legally speaking, those individuals were there illegally. That's where you get the contraband from. Morally speaking, how could you be upset with them? There's no way you could be upset with them. They think we're out, we free. We're gonna at least find them, even if they did not know, have compasses and things in order to travel north. And so it says federal forces could seize any Confederate property using war effort, which is also true. It could be a house, it could have been a base, it could have been literally just about anything. And so keep that in mind. There were some people who were enslaved who were able to, so able bodied men were supposed to fight, but a lot of individuals in the South would send an enslaved person to fight in their place. I know that sounds crazy, but yes, that happened. All right, so a little bit more on contraband, a little bit more detail on how this kinds of stuff was being addressed. So you guys know called Third Amendment. You probably, of course, don't know it off of your top of your head, of course not. But it talks about quartering men or quartering the military. The Second Amendment talks about the right to bear arms is a remix of what's actually there. It is instead was created with the idea that if the United States ever was in a situation like the Revolutionary War, that men should be able to keep guns in their houses so that a militia or a ragtag sort of military group could be called up and fight at a moment's notice. Well, and that quartering was the same thing. The idea that if the military came to your land or to your home, you had a responsibility to put them up. You had a responsibility to house them. And so this is a little bit more sophisticated in that the reason the militia was needed is because we didn't have a military. But clearly, as you can see here, military existed. Military forces existed. So if I can put it into even more perspective, Oliver Otis Howard, the namesake of our university, he was a part of the military effort to move Native Americans or indigenous people. I say both, but there's a longer reason why. But anyway, and so groups that were in northern Florida and southern Georgia, some in Alabama, were forced to move to modern day Oklahoma. So there's a lot of native land there. And so the idea, he was a general. So it was an established military by the time we get here. So while they didn't have to deal with the whole idea of militia, they had to deal with what does it look like when people are being declared contraband. What does it look like when a military group needs to take a space? And so defining some of that was necessary. Okay. There again, just more about Lincoln ignoring those who wanted to enlist. This is important because this is important because I need you guys to know his attitude. Look at this. It says when Union General David Hunter abolished slavery in occupied areas of South Carolina, Lincoln revoked his order and reprimanded Hunter. So that speaks more so to who he really was. So let me put a pin here. Some some of the lies that people were told about Lincoln were very intentional. Intentional from a research standpoint, meaning that there were actual PhDs, doctorates creating false research, and that research was used um, to create curriculum, and then that curriculum was taught in public schools. And so this is a counter to that. And a lot of what Black research has been a counter to intentionally, basically, I don't want to say just telling lies, but in some ways just lying about what happened or making something seem and more important than it actually was, if that makes sense. All right, just a picture of some African American troops. So, one of Lincoln's positions, make sure that you know about his first thought. Remember, I told you that he made numbers of efforts of what to do with Black people once enslavement ended. That was major for him. And this was one view or one long term solution that he thought of. Again, followed by colonization outside of the US. Okay? So keep that in mind. Put a pin here. No, I won't go. Well, please understand when they're talking about compensation, they're not talking about compensation for those who were enslaved. They're talking about compensation for plantation owners. Pay attention to that. Here's money for the property that you're going to lose, the labor you're going to lose. Okay, so that's the proposal there. The reason I said put a pin in that is because the Haitian Revolution that took place in Haiti, right, in the early 1800s, Haiti was made to pay France for the war. They won the war. The victor of wars don't pay for wars. So let me pause there. The wars that have happened throughout for most of modern history, the losing countries have had to pay. And I don't know if anybody knew that, but they've had to pay. Like they were just talking about how the Holocaust survivors were paid money directly from Germany. Yeah. So the idea of compensation in this regard or this large is not abnormal. So why does that matter to Haiti? Well, Haiti beat France. France felt some kind of way, basically, of having to pay plantation owners for the loss of their property. So they made Haiti up until like I don't want, it wasn't last week, but it was we were alive. Up until that point, Haiti was paying France because France had paid the plantation owners, the ones that owned the bondage of Black people in Haiti. They won, but they were paying for the loss of property. That's the same thing that's happening here. Yes, it's absolutely crazy. Paying for the loss of property of people who never should have been even considered to be your property, but the government feeling that it's necessary to pay these individuals for the loss of property. So when you think about reparations, if you are willing to pay them for the loss of their property, you're not willing to pay the people whose lives were thought of as property, who died, who were made to work, whose labor was stolen. I don't know. It is what it is. You can't tell me you can't talk about reparations. People want to make it seem like reparations is a crazy idea. It ain't that crazy. How would it be that crazy? This is a form of reparations for wrong being done to a particular group of people. Absolutely. All right. Then Lincoln ends up having to move towards emancipation. One of the big pushes reasons he had to move towards emancipation was people were dying. The Civil War was dumb. So forgive me, I'm a little tired, but the Civil War was dumb. I'll say this, not for the reasoning behind the fight. Black people were like, we just want the North to win, so this slavery stuff can end. Not that part of it. But if you ever go and Google Revolutionary War, go Google Civil War, and look at how they used to go to war. I'm gonna line up in this line, and you're gonna line up in that line, and we're just gonna shoot at each other. We're both in this field. and we're just shooting. And then a whole bunch of people get hit, they'd fall and they'd die. Then the next line would come up. And so there were tons of casualties because it wasn't very smart at all in terms of the way that they were fighting. The other thing was that people would get hit in different limbs, and they would have to remove those limbs. But because medicine and things wasn't that advanced, people would get gangrene. A lot of stuff would happen, and they would die because of the sepsis, the bacteria getting into their blood. So it was really it was gory. It was just crazy. But I will interject. It wasn't as bad for Black people. Why? Because they wouldn't let us fight. They didn't let us fight till they really didn't have very many people left. And so by the time Black people started fighting, we had casualties. I don't want to say that we didn't. However, the casualties weren't at the same number. Yeah, they weren't definitely at the same number. So that made a difference. My 5 times great grandfather, 5 times great grandfather, 6 times, either 5 or 6. I don't know where he lies, but he and his sons went and fought in for the Union, and he and his sons all returned. All right, the rejection of Black people conversation. Remember, I told you about that meeting that he held with Black leaders that Lincoln held at the White House, and he was like, "Yeah, don't y'all want to colonize? If y'all leave, we got this company called the American Colonization Society, and we'll pay for it." Black people's like, we've been here 240, maybe by this time, maybe 44 years, 45, somewhere around there. We don't have a connection to Africa. Not that we're not African, but we don't have a connection. And then later on, he ends up proposing, of course, Panama, and we say no. So the Emancipation Proclamation, just very quickly, was an executive order, which means it did not go through Congress first. Congress creates bills or acts. Those bills, those acts, it depends on what it's called, but they're basically the same thing. They create the details of what would one day become a law. Congress does not make laws. Congress does not make laws. Generally speaking, if they were, it's a whole convoluted process. But generally, they pass the bill or the act within the two houses. They get majority on either side, and then it goes to the president. The president signs it. Then it becomes law. The president doesn't want to sign it or doesn't believe it should be law. The president vetoes said law. And so, with an executive order, Congress isn't included at all. It comes directly from the president, directly from the executive branch. It's not widely used because it does not have input from Congress that's supposed to be the representation of the people. And so a lot of presidents don't use it. They use it very sort of cautiously. They use it mindfully. Yeah. So I could say some things, but yeah, pretty much. All right. So it was issued in 1862, and that September it did not come into law until January 1st, 1863. And then once it came into law, it allowed for Black soldiers. You see where it says white Southerners ridiculed the proclamation because they ridiculed it because it's like slavery is outlawed in the country. Did you really think that those from the South were going to let people go? Of course not. And so it was like, yeah, you said it, but it doesn't really mean much. Just right, yeah. Remember, I told you guys this is the origin of churches' watch night services. Watch night services. The first one was December 31st, 1862, turning into 1863. We are watching for the law to change. All right, Northern response to emancipation. Make sure you read that. Don't think because the North was for ending slavery that the North that they weren't racist. They were very much so. And some of the anti-Black riots in the North will reflect that. So keep that in mind. There was like opposition to the emancipation, blah blah blah. They were opposed to it, blah blah blah. Northern Democrats, it's whatever. Again, you have these individuals are against the government changing the law and the laws in the country related to enslavement. So the laws are making it possible for enslavement to continue. which is why those who fight for reparations are saying that they should receive, us, those who are descended from those who were enslaved, should receive reparations because of the government's direct involvement in a number of aspects of enslavement, including backing the insurance or bonds on individuals who were enslaved. The bonds were backed, they were backed by gold. Okay. And so that's why we're talking about reparations. We're talking about reparations because they legally made it possible for the nonsense to occur, and that they should be just as responsible for the nonsense. So for those who are from California right now, it's not everybody who's black in California gets reparations. So no, there were specific groups that were brought to California to work via the gold rush, and they were enslaved. Now pause. California's a free state, never has had slavery, but those who were enslaved were brought to California. And we're still, basically for all intents and purposes, still being enslaved. They weren't free. And so now people are asking that California be made fiscally responsible for some of the treatment and the things that happened to those individuals once they were in the free state. Okay, so that's where that comes from. So keep that in mind. The government is involved not because it's the government's responsibility to watch out for what other people are doing. The government is involved because the government was, you guessed it, involved. So keep that in mind when we're thinking about reparations. When we're thinking about reparations. All right, Abraham Lincoln, blah, blah, blah. Again, this is making it appear, oh, look at him just talking to the Negroes, etc., etc. Look at, the Union soldiers. That blue tells you that it's the Union. The red, outside the Revolutionary War, would have been the Confederates. She's just as concerned. I'm assuming this is his wife. What was her name? Can't think of her name. Um, this black person in the back is sad. This black woman, oh no, enslavement is over. What am I going to do? That kind of thing. Now, were there some that were like that? Yeah, but it's an exaggeration to say that they were completely devastated and that Union soldiers were invested in this keeping the peace, if that be a thing. The white woman right behind Lincoln to the left of the lady with the umbrella, she's looking like, woe is me, what are we gonna do? Look at the faces of the two ones here, the two black women. They're looking at Lincoln, what are we gonna do? In quotation marks. Was Lincoln tall? He was, but understand that being tall or being depicted as tall is supposed to be a sign of authority. It's supposed to be a sign of a trusted leader. Yeah, I know. All right, we're done with 11.2. All right, the Emancipation Proclamation. We've already talked a little bit about it, but let's just make sure we go over what needs to be known for the Emancipation Proclamation. Let's see, there it is. Of course, it takes effect January 1st. And it was issued while the Civil War was happening. The Civil War would not end until April, Mayish of 1865. So he was pushed to do this, not because he wanted to emancipate anybody. He had no desire for that, just to be frank. It was because of the necessity of bodies. They needed people to fight. And so it's like, they want to fight, go let them fight, that kind of thing. And so, again, language wasn't was uninspiring and unmoving because, again, this wasn't we hold the truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal. That's the preamble to the Declaration of Independence, right? It's supposed to inspire, it's supposed to move, it's supposed to, give this great sense of coming into this new era in the formation of the country in the Declaration of Independence, or the creation of a more perfect union by ushering in and allowing all people. Nah, it wasn't that. It wasn't that at all. I was like, all right, he didn't say it like that, but he was really like, all right, black people are free, I mean, it wouldn't be right for us to hold people, it wouldn't, that's kind of wrong. And they should be free because they should be free. And since they should be free because they should be free, then we should go ahead and let them be free. I mean, it probably wasn't, I can't remember the language. It probably wasn't that stale, but trust me when I say it wasn't anything that was like gung ho to end enslavement. It just wasn't. Um, I'm looking at it now, and it was a total of 5 pages. Like, think of this man ending in an institution which has basically been the foundation of um, America. It created those raw goods so that those raw goods could then be turned into. I lied. It's only 2 pages. The way it was written, it looked like more. Turning those raw goods into finished products in the North. Remember those finished goods? I know you do. He's ending this, and it's uninspiring. By the President of the United States, a proclamation. No, it literally says that. Whereas the 22nd day of September in the year of our Lord, he really said that. 1862, a proclamation issued by the President of the United States containing, among other things, the following writ that in the first day of January, the year of our Lord, we just use the same words over and over again. The all persons held as enslaved within the states or designated a part of the states, the people whereas shall be in rebellion against the United States. Basically, if you keep holding people in enslavement, you're looked at as being rebellious. And the power is vested in me as commander in chief of Army, Navy, blah, blah, is fit to necessary measure of war, is to suppress this rebellion, and he's repeating himself. Uh-huh. He ain't said nothing about loving freedom. He ain't said nothing about loving equality or justice. Those are usually things that you would have heard. Go look at political science. Go look at the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution. Oh, they laying it on thick. So keep it in mind. It did not include enslaved people in the 4 border states still in the Union or in areas of Confederate states the Union had already occupied. So he was very, very careful of the language that he used. Um, the proclamation issued made the war about freeing people instead of what he had been campaigning on before he became president and the things that he said in the very first part of the war. It gave the Union cause more authority. So we can now say the Union was fighting in the Civil War in order to free the enslaved, when in actuality, that's not what they would have said to you. They would have said, we're fighting the war to end the institution of slavery. We need to do something with these Black people, pretty much. And so that gave the appearance that they were these moral authorities because of the way he tried to write it. But he did not believe the stuff that was coming out of his own mouth and out of that pen. So be very clear about that. And when you talk to your mom and them, you say, Dr. Mack said, and they may or may not agree. I venture to say that most would agree though, because yeah, we don't buy into the fakeness no more. This is just a view of some of the free. Oh, there we go. I just remembered some of the free states. I remember because I looked at this. Um, we should be celebrating. You all should be celebrating Cinco de Mayo. Yes, I said Cinco de Mayo. Why I say Cinco? I said Cinco de Mayo because Cinco de Mayo is a celebration of the people of Puebla in Mexico stopping the French from being able to come to the US, because they're going to come through Mexico, come to the US and aid the Confederacy because the Confederacy was losing. They were losing pretty bad. And so France and England were against the ending of enslavement. To be very clear, they were not for it. Neither one, because these enslaved people were basically free labor and they created raw products, and those raw products they needed them in order to manufacture. So cool, whatever. So they were going to come through Mexico. They sailed through the Caribbean, was going to come through Mexico, through Texas, so that they could aid the Confederacy. And the people of Puebla was like, but you won't do that today. And there was more than one battle, and they beat them. And the people of Puebla were not military trained. It was nothing. They just said, hey, this is wrong. And we're not going to allow you to come through this way, come through our country, and and continue on with enslavement. And so it is a holiday in the U.S. that celebrates the actions of those in Mexico. The holiday, I'm not saying that nothing is celebrated in holiday, but it's in Mexico and Puebla. I'm just saying that it's not called Cinco de Mayo. It's not the same kind of celebration, but there is celebration. There had always been a relationship between enslaved people and Mexico, because if you were in the deep South and you were going to leave or to run away, often they went to Mexico. And then those who were in sort of the upper South and some of the middle states would go to Canada. But it wouldn't make any sense for someone, say, from Louisiana to try to go all the way to Canada. They would often go through, some would go through Texas. And enslavement wasn't Texas. Enslavement was in Texas. I think that was one of the most Western, if I'm not mistaken. All right, the effects of emancipation destroyed any chance for Britain or France would recognize the Confederate government, and please believe that they were sitting on the corner, they were sitting on the curb ready to do so. Would lead to financial military assistance from the South. Remember, I told you that it weakened the Confederacy's ability to fight the war. That was literally it. And so once that was proclaimed, here was the issue. The Emancipation Proclamation, let's be clear, Southern states seceded. They left. They had their own president. They were claiming to be their own country, separate from the Union. When he addressed when the Emancipation Proclamation was released, he didn't just address the states that remained in the Union. He was addressing all of them. Okay. And so that is why they're saying it destroyed their chance to help them, because they didn't necessarily, they didn't want to get into the space of recognizing them as a separate state. Okay. A separate state isn't government, or a separate country. Let me say it that way so it doesn't mess you up. So there, to undermine slavery in the South and contribute to the Confederacy's defeat, Black people now less likely to work for their owners, etc. Hate that language. And more self-emancipate. Let me reread that. Black people were less likely to work for plantation owners or for the Confederacy. Lots of enslaved people self-emancipated. Yeah, I like those language. Anyway, without emancipation, the U.S. would not have survived as a unified nation. All right, so this is the real cool timeline that you can look at. Again, this is available in your file section. We ain't worry about her. All right, 7.3 is how did Abraham Lincoln policy on slavery when the Civil War began in 1861. Similar to his policy, it was not. So you can think about it, but you won't have to do any of that. All right, so we're basically done there. Our next chapter, give me just a second. I will stop sharing so I can pull up the next chapter. Our next chapter is chapter 12. I want to make sure, let me open that up. Give me just a second so that we can get ready for chapter 12. If you have any questions while I'm going over the content, the material, please make sure that you email me the question before we see each other on Thursday. Okay. Reason being is that I will be able to either email an answer of some sort, just to make sure that you have that information, that you're not waiting for it. But I won't know if you do not email me. So please, 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 send me that email. Make sure that you reach out so that if I need to, if I need to, if I need to send that out so people feel, good about that section, I will do just that. All right. So here is our chapter 12. We are looking at the following sections. 12.1, 12.2, pretty straightforward. 12.3, once again, 12.1, 12.2, and 12.3. So make sure that you have those sections marked out. This PowerPoint presentation, as you know, is available for you for your use. It is available in the file section. I can't even get to what I want to get to. Give me just, well, all right, fine. Don't be a jerk. All right. So, PowerPoint starting from the beginning. This is the beginning part of Reconstruction. This is chapter 12. Chapter 13, which will cover in person in class on Thursday. When? Thursday? Thursday, yes, bet. That we'll cover it together in person on, well, live stream. On Thursday, we will cover chapters 13 and 14. And so this is just the first half. They break it up based on, some of the good things that Black people were able to accomplish during this time period. All right. Oh, sorry, Freedmen's Bureau. Freedmen's Bureau, just think about Freedmen's Bureau as an extension of the government. It's like an agency within the government. So if you're thinking about the post office or you're thinking about the IRS, it's similar to that, with a very specific type of task. What you're seeing here is school marms. So the white women in the picture are considered to be school marms. What are school marms? They were women who were dedicated to teaching. Often they did not marry, and they came from the upper Northeast, so like Massachusetts and Vermont and all those areas. They came to the South to work teaching the children in various schools. This is a public school, by the way, which is one of the many spoils that Black people were able to get for the entire country and not just ourselves. Before this period, people got tutors. They did not have public school. Public school wasn't a thought. All right. So 12.1, explain exactly what freedom meant for those who were formerly enslaved. Number 12.2, discuss the importance of acquiring land had to people who had been enslaved. And number 12.3, explain how African Americans gained an education. All right, let's move. Something to consider and think about, explain exactly what freedom meant. What did freedom mean to people? Remember, I told you that it was it was a process. It was a process for those who were who happened to be older, the older people who were enslaved. The idea of the practice ending was it was a lot for them. It was a lot for them to kind of to consider because it wasn't a life that they imagined. Those who were plantation owners um, had somehow deluded themselves into believing that the practice was a humane practice and that they were upset that people wanted to get away so fast. I thought you loved me. When some of it, to be completely honest with you, some of it was manipulation and not like it might be manipulation to be able to carry favor. And then stand in the space to kind of broker stuff between the enslaved community and the plantation owners' home. So we friends while we here. Oh, but I can leave. Peace out. They left. And so I thought that they had invested a lot within the enslaved who were now wanted to be free to flee. Again, a very jaded idea of what enslavement meant. So, we talked about the use of race to justify the slave trade, right? Cool. Well, that psychological sort of twist in it permeated the entire practice. So we have to believe that we are civilized and that everyone that looks like you from that continent or those countries is primitive, you have no culture, we're helping you, you don't work, we're going to help you work. We have to believe that in order to dull some of the moral objections that they should have had to the practice of enslavement. And so that I don't want to call it brainwashing because you're socialized to believe this. This isn't just, we pulled you off and told you some stuff to get you to believe something that wasn't true. This is I'm teaching. My grandmother taught my mama taught me, her mama taught that kind of thing. It's very cyclical in that way. And so that show of a reaction of remorse was a certain level of like delusion, if you wanted to be really honest. We're good to you. Okay, if that's what you think, but to them, that may have been true. So there were differing reactions for those who had been formerly enslaved. There were some who revealed their inner feelings of distaste, like, nah, I might have been smiling and, nodding my head, but now that I don't have to, you're terrible. And then there were those who were elderly, those who were older, who knew no other life but the one that they were living. They had a hard time with it. Remember, I told you guys about reuniting families. I told you guys that this was the trigger or the start of family reunions. This is why Black people instituted family reunions. Do other groups do them now? Yeah, but the way in which ours are done and some of the stuff that happens at family reunions is tied to this because um, they would put advertisements. So the formerly enslaved would put advertisements in newspapers in order to get the word out that certain groups, certain family members, they were looking for them. And so a way to make sure that they could all congregate was we're all going to get together in Washington Park by such and such late on this day, this time. And so now we can all come to one place so that we don't have to go around looking for each other, which is very, very similar to what we see now. Some branches update one another about what's happening, et cetera, et cetera. I have been involved in the planning and the execute, well, the planning of one and then the execution of another of two friends' family reunions, and now I randomly picked up the thought and start planning my own family's family reunion, and it's not for the faint of heart in terms of planning it from 2, 3, 4, 5 states away. And so just keep in mind that this practice has endured for a very long time. Usually it's people from out west going south, people from the north coming down south, and connecting with old family members. Also, folks don't have telephones, right? Like, so it's not like you can go on Facebook and your cousins are just on Facebook. It was a different sort of a thing. And even as technology became, much more available, became more modern, um, family reunions became one of the only vacations for a lot of Black people. Kill two birds, one stone. We're gonna go out of town. We're gonna go to this family reunion, that kind of thing. So it says some spouses had remarried during separation. Yeah, I push back on that. A lot of them had not. So let's not play this game that people, when they're talking about remarrying, they're talking about spouses that had jumped the broom with their mates, and then the male left and went off and went to war, and then when they came back, some of these women were remarried. That was, did it happen? Yeah, but was that the normal practice? Was that something that, nah, not as much. Women were waiting for their mates and or looking for their mates very actively. All right, so we done with that. 12.2. Now, this one is longer. This is a longer section. So if you haven't, I would review this section for real, because it's one of the longer sections. 1 out of 10. Okay, so keep that in mind. Why was it important? So I'm going to drop some gems, and we won't stay here very long because we're already going over time in terms of how long I want this review to last. All right, so in this case, it starts at General Sherman's, who's a Union, Special Field Order number 15, somewhere in your notes, right? 40 acres and a mule. All right. For the most part, it was in South Carolina, but there was a good section of Florida. A part of it, so basically, what it was promoting was this idea that this land would be given to those who were enslaved in that area, and they would be provided with army mules to work said land. And it was supposed to be a way sort of build themselves after enslavement. It was not a bad idea. Wasn't a bad idea at all. So understand, land provided a couple things. It provided economic means so that they could, of course, grow crops. It provided a place to stay, a place to live, right? And socially, it provided a space or communal space, creating towns and different things of that nature. So keep that in mind. So at the bottom where it says families work together, that's what I'm sort of getting at. And so land wasn't just land for the sake of being land. Land meant a lot, especially in terms of needing, if you wanted to get loans for seeds or your home or objects in your home to buy like beds and things of that nature. And then like plows and different things like that. It represents um it represents wealth, absolutely. And crazy enough, it still has that same sort of what do you call it? Denotation. Connotation, my bad. Connotation. Meaning that cars depreciate, but owning a home is the same thing as kind of owning land in that way. Unless you're in DC. You can own the DC home, but you don't own the land. But that's neither here nor there. But anyway, but yeah, it's similar in that it's a form of wealth. That's Berry Farms here in DC. Whereas Berry Farms is Maryland, basically right across the river from DCA, the airport. You don't have to worry about this. The this Royal Port Royal experiment where I don't do any questions on there. It's a little more in depth than what they give you here. But I do want you to pay attention to this. Pay attention to the Freedmen's Bureau. The Freedmen's Bureau, the first director, the first and only for any intents and purposes of the Freedmen's Bureau was our very own General Oliver Otis Howard, the university's namesake. What was the Freedmen's Bureau supposed to do? It was supposed to do two things. Freedmen's Bureau was supposed to help those who freedmen, refugees pointed to low key to people that were enslaved, but it also really more so pointed to those who had seceded. So it helped those people from seceded states re-enter the Union, and it helped those people who were once enslaved to transition into society. So what did the Freedmen's Bureau help do? It helped them obtain land because it redistributed land, gain education. They had schools. Yeah, they ended up eventually creating some schools, including K-12. K-12 would have been more like kind of like a normal school. And then of course Howard, and Howard wasn't the only school that was created out of the Freedmen's Bureau. It was just the first in DC proper. The other HBCU in DC is University of the District of Columbia, UDC. All right, negotiated labor contracts, basically keeping things fair for Black peoples trying to enter into the labor space without being free labor. They settled legal disputes, criminal disputes. So they had like a kind of like a court system, but not like really, but like basically a court system. Provided food, medical care, transportation for Black and white people who were left destitute by the war. So there's a couple things. Freedmen's Bank is connected to the Bureau, but not really connected to the Bureau, but we'll have it there. Freedmen's Hospital was connected to the Bureau. Remember, I told you that the School of C was Freedmen's Hospital. And if I keep trying to search it, I don't think any more standing. I think the School of C, that Freedmen's Hospital, is the only one left standing. Because after the war, well, not after the war, after Reconstruction ended and federal troops were taken out of the South, there was a concerted effort to destroy Freedmen's hospitals. And a lot of the relics of the federal troops being in the South. All right, they had 900 agents across the South. Agents would often serve 10K to 20K amount of people. Very few were Black. They needed money. Real talk. They needed money. And I told you, bless his little heart, but Oliver Otis, Oliver Otis was gullible and not very smart when it came to business decisions. I would like to think that they knew that. I don't see how anyone would not know who he was. They knew that, and people were able to kind of push him around and not fund the Freedmen's Bureau very well at all. So it was a good effort. Well, it was a good idea, but it didn't have the kind of backing that it really needed. So pause here. You know, Dr. Mack keeps talking about reparations. This is sort of like a form of reparations. Sort of, kind of. It's not necessarily direct payment, but it is an understanding that the government had a responsibility to the people who were formerly enslaved, and their responsibility as the government was to, we talking land, we're talking health, we're talking all of these different areas because of their involvement in enslavement. Was the government enslaving people directly? Now, if you really want to get down to it, um, enslaved people built the White House. Let's be very clear. And the White House wasn't one of the only places that were built. So, I mean, we could get into details like that, but the most important part is the legal backing, the laws that came out that reinforce enslavement. So just keep it very clear. So any group that has ever been paid reparations here in the US, it's been based off the actions and the laws tied to the oppressing, discrimination, the confiscation of land, businesses, etc., that was done in the name of those laws. Okay? So it does not make sense that people are looking around going, why does the US need to pay reparations? Well, why did the US think it was necessary for the Freedmen's Bureau? If enslavement was a private thing that happened between a private plantation owner and regular old people, why did the government get involved? Why were states declared free versus enslaved states? Why would the government need to pass a 13th Amendment admitting that these people should not have been enslaved in the 14th, admitting that they were equal as in humans to be citizens? Why would the government need to do any of those things if the government did not have responsibility in the fact that the practice continued? So in real life, kids got to go to school by a certain age. If that wasn't a rule, it's a law. If it wasn't a law or a rule, then I could just have a kid up in my house because it's personal, right? I'm a mama. I have a kid. I don't want my kid to go to school. I should be able to say that. The response is no. That is an issue that the government has to be involved in. So that means the government has to create and have ready the school, the teachers. That's why we pay for public school. That's why the government pays. So I'm saying that to say it isn't this private. Not all acts can be simply viewed as being private, especially when things like laws become involved. And the fact that they were making a decision about what states would be when they came into the union, the fact that they had this war, all of these different things should tell you the fact that they created the Freedmen's Bureau and they were giving money to this bureau to do things like land and houses and healthcare makes it very clear that the government felt responsible to its citizens, which is what it's supposed to do, and it felt responsible for its actions before they became citizens. You can't help the destitute if I wasn't once destitute. And if I was once destitute because I was enslaved and you were a part of that, then you have responsibility in as well. Keep that in mind. The need for assistance was desperate. Large portions of the South had been destroyed. Thousands of people died of smallpox, cholera. So one smallpox just came back up in the US, which is crazy. We have a shot for that. Cholera is, if I'm not mistaken, diarrhea. Yellow fever comes from water, pneumonia, malnutrition, etc. The Bureau established camps for the hungry, the homeless, the hungry, and the sick. All right. So here's just a little bit more detail about special unit, Lord, not SVU, Special Field Order 15. So that land that was distributed to Black people via Special Field Order 15 was returned back to its original owners. Okay. Yeah. So the land was distributed and it was taken back almost immediately. Andrew Johnson was the vice president when Lincoln was assassinated and he was elected again. So he finished Lincoln's term, but he also had his own term as well. He was very racist. Remember, we talked about Andrew Johnson as the one who um, who was intoxicated when he signed Howard into law, into being in existence. All right. So Black people insisted the government provide land, which is true, because again, if you are concerned with the overall, the word here is welfare, faring well, if you're concerned with the welfare of the people, and you know how important land is, it's the government's job to provide that land, and they did not. Congress refused. The president determined to restore lands to white people. So the land that was confiscated by the Freedmen's Bureau, given to Black peoples, was taken away and given back to those individuals and or their families, their estates. Freemen thought that they deserved land. I don't think we were wrong at all. All right, Homestead Act, da, da, da. More than 3 million acres of public land was set aside for Black people and white Southerners who had been loyal to the Union. Much of it was swamped and unfertile, unsuitable for farming. Yeah. Although Black families claimed the land, they lacked the financial resources to cultivate it. Timber companies acquired much of it. So the act basically failed. And so you made the act. Somebody said, well, why don't you just give them that land over there? Nobody's doing anything with it. You can't do anything with that land. And they did exactly that. And guess what? You couldn't do anything with that land. It's like, yeah, you tried, you came close, but you didn't come close enough. All right, we are done with no. Yes, I forgot sharecropping. All right, so sharecropping starts early here, but we don't hear about sort of the terribleness of sharecropping until a little bit more in chapter 14 and maybe a taste in chapter 15, just talking about how sharecropping ended up being worse once the federal troops leave the South, how sharecropping ended up being worse for Black people than enslavement. It's absolutely crazy. They would basically be put in a hole due to a lack of literacy. Sometimes the books would be cooked, sometimes they'd be told lies. It would take the Freedmen's Bureau being there to supervise the contracts because freed Black men were being taken advantage of and or threatened with violence when they said, no, that's not true, or challenged these agreements. Sorry about that. They challenged those agreements. Where'd it go? Sorry, y'all. Yes. So just read this to try to get an idea of sharecropping. But again, sharecropping is only someone owning the land and then different people getting small parts of the land, and they have to give a portion of the harvest or whatever to the landowner. And there being lies about how much was actually submitted, and how much was owed, and different things of that nature. This is county in Georgia. And so looking at plantations, which would be 1860, and then by 1881, that's the sharecropping map. All right, freed washerwomen. This is cool because they ended up basically forming a union and protesting. They had a strike in Mississippi, the ones that were Mississippi, and were able to earn a consistent wage for each load. All right, Black churches were very instrumental in the formation of, honestly, of HBCUs, to be completely honest with you. There are several that the AME Church created and have sustained, so paying attention to that. Also, these different denominations and how freed Black people were able to join these various denominations, and whether or not they joined them and or, which is true, created their own churches. So African Methodist Episcopal is a denomination, meaning that it is the umbrella under which churches within that particular group are formed. They're a Christian church, a Christian denomination, but underneath Christianity, you would find African Methodists, you would find Southern Baptists, you would find Methodists, you would find just Baptists. Progressive Baptist is the name, but yes. And so during this time, Black people were establishing themselves. They were establishing their own churches, and or they were becoming part of some of the larger denominations. Not as much, mostly creating their own. Some were Baptists and creating their own Baptist churches, even if they did not create their own Baptist-like denomination, which is what happened with Methodist Episcopal AMEs. All right, pay attention to class and status and how that was impacting where they go to church and who they associate themselves with. Church is one of the most, it's definitely racially divided, but even within various actual racial groups, it is also divided by class and status. We do it here in the here now. There are certain churches within the DMV region. You guys would probably know, but there are churches in the DMV region that when you say you go to that church, it means something. It absolutely means something in terms of your social status. Keep that in mind. What are those churches? Metropolitan A&E is one in DC, and then Alfred Street. Alfred Street is Baptist. Alfred Street Baptist is another one that is in Arlington, uh, in an area that was all black at one point because black people were pushed out of DC proper and took up space in that area. We actually, black people actually, the village that was there owned the land that Arlington Cemetery is currently on. It was taken from them by the federal government in order to construct the cemetery. I believe some of the airport that happened as well. It was developed much later, but it was on land that black people had once been. All right, education. Let's go through that. Education and freedom were inseparable. What do I need you to take away from this? Again, look, 1866, the Freedmen's Bureau set aside 50K. The Bureau set aside a little bit more money. This is great. But look at the bottom. By 1870, black people had contributed over $1 million. Remember, I told you guys that it was $22.5 million by themselves. Did you pay attention? Freedmen's Bureau, see government. Bureau, government. They saved more money and put more money towards schools than the government. Let me put this into perspective. They did this with schools. We don't read on the Freedmen's Bank too much because it wasn't necessarily a part of government. It wasn't. They put about the same amount of money in the Freedmen's Bank. So uneducated or formerly educated black people who were once enslaved were putting that kind of money into banks, that kind of money into schooling. So this idea that there was never a drive that black people, after being enslaved, they really just didn't want to do well, or Reconstruction failed because they didn't know better, it's just not true. It's just not. But the prevailing idea about what black people did during Reconstruction, that's what I was talking about when I said scholars from the college level white scholars from places like Columbia, University of Chicago, etc., that they were dispensing stuff, and then their research would be used to create curriculum for schools. So they would lie about it, and no, I say lie, flat out lie. They weren't concerned with the truth. And then that research was taken and curriculum was constructed. So no one would ever have heard about this. I would if we were in regular class. I would ask, had you ever heard that black people were doing this? You might have heard that they were doing things, but you may never have heard that they had saved this amount of money, that they had invested this amount of money in public school. Keep that in mind. Black teachers, we had some, of course, that we were preferred. Before and during while HBCUs were created, a lot of HBCUs were normal schools. Remember, I said that they came out of normal schools. And if they did have any graduate level sort of programs, it would be for teachers and preachers. I know, teachers and preachers. Minor college, that building I told you all right next door to the A building. The A building, there's a building, and then the School of B. That building is a minor teachers college. It was the first normal school in DC for the creation of black teachers. And there was conversation about minor being the school that Howard comes out of. And it was shot down because they're like, no, we don't want it to be another normal school turned, college. We want to create intentionally a university. Howard has been a university from its inception. The name of the university was decided November 1866. Okay. So when people talk about HIU, talk about Hampton, that's part of the issue. We were created a university. We didn't wake up one morning and decide to become a university. All right. So Hampton didn't meet university. I won't say they didn't meet university standards. They did not become a university until 1984. And even while they were in university, they would call themselves HIU. I need to find out what date they finally. I think maybe 1984 might have been when they finally dropped the I, or maybe shortly thereafter. But yeah, that's the distinction there. And so, anyway, black women and black men responded to teaching, meaning from the north. Black and white came to the south. Um, there was a lot of judgment, and that's all this is talking about how they were treated by those coming from the north. So it's very condescending, paternalistic. Let me teach you how to be civilized, even from black people. Be very clear, other black folks. We talking about her. The establishment of HBCU. So make sure that you read this. Lincoln Institute is Lincoln University, and Lincoln University can be found in Missouri. My aunt went to Lincoln University. Again, elementary, secondary education. Remember, I was telling you about how um, Howard, even Howard, we weren't in normal school, but in Howard, we had sort of that bridge, that preparation for those who needed to finish sort of that normal school type of education, and then they would go and transfer to we wouldn't call it transfer, but then they would go to Howard as normal as well. Da, 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 da. Wait, the reason that it's called an institute and that it was called an institute was because of its vocational training. Vocational training, Tuskegee, vocational, it was institute. Vocational training, meaning your education was based on specific vocations like jobs, on specific types of skills. Doesn't mean they didn't learn English. It doesn't mean they didn't learn, some sort of history or whatever. But the focus of the school was based on this. The difference, we did not have a vocational view. We have never had a vocational view at Howard. We have always, for the most part, as a university, been very mindful about having a classical or classic view. So the vocational versus classic or a classical view. What does that mean? Languages, or you could say liberal arts, languages, philosophy, history, so have more of a comprehensive sort of education. So I know you guys have paid attention to the College of Arts and Sciences being called the Flagstaff. Yes, the Flagstaff means this is the sort of the shining college of the university. Yay, yay. But it also means that it's the most comprehensive education you could receive at Howard. Now, I'm just going to tell you, this is just me being personal, as a political science major myself. Um, I've met some folks and I've met students, bless your hearts, that it makes a difference. You can kind of see the difference between a student that might come from a school of B versus a student that comes from COAS by their junior year, maybe even second semester sophomore year. Because for the school of B, after your freshman year, you don't come out of the school of B. Your classes are very specific in terms of your major and a certain type of education. Doesn't mean that they're not smart. I'm not meaning that, but the way that you're learning in COAS in different subject areas to approach sort of society. So you could be a history major, you're going to have Spanish or French, and you're going to have, science, and you're going to have a philosophy class. All of those things aren't necessarily required. Same thing like College of Engineering and Architecture. After a certain point, you don't come over and take classes at COAS, which is what School of B does freshman year. Is what they do. School of C is a little better. They spend a little bit more time in COAS. But I say that to say, having those multiple random classes, quite honestly, they make people much more well-rounded. It just is what it is. And that's why, I mean, you're going, oh my gosh, I can't believe she's saying that. But that's why COAS is called Flagstaff. That's exactly why it is. Because of it giving this sort of comprehensive classical view in education. Hampton did not have that. They probably have it now. Probably. They have it now, but their roots come from vocational type of education. And that comes from the mirroring of the it was Hampton and Tuskegee, but sort of this mirroring of what Booker T. Washington would have would have was pushing. He was pushing this idea of Black people shouldn't be worried about becoming lawyers or all these things. We should be worried about getting money, doing certain things to get money to build up the community. So much so he decided to be a hater. He hated on Howard as much as he tried to. Well, that's neither here nor there. But yes, that's why they're called the Institute. That's why there's always been beef. I don't pay directly direct attention to them because they ain't got no pictures like this about me milking no daggone cows with Howard. I bet you we don't. You learn how to milk. You go ahead and learn how to milk that cow. We'll continue to graduate the first lawyer, Black lawyer, second Black lawyer, doctors, things like that. Yes, I will teach you how to be a hater. You will be hating for the rest of your life on that school over there by the same port where enslavement started. But anyway, right. And so this is just this section. I won't go too much next on. Spirit don't want to go there, but just this idea that Blacks being educated in an environment where just 5 years before you were thought of as being inferior, there was a reaction. And this was some of the reaction by Southern whites. Charlotte E. Ray. She was the first Black woman to graduate from Howard University's School of Law. Love her. But yeah, so that's where it comes from. Don't worry about the prompt. We did that. We ain't doing the violence. I'm sorry, Dr. Matt can't do it. Love you to pieces, but I can't. I know my limits, and that's one of my limits. I don't necessarily go down there. It's just too much for me emotionally. I be feeling stuff. But anyway, all right. So you also will get an email on Wednesday because I need for you to register for Echo Poll, ECHO Poll, POLM. Where do I go to register? On the left-hand side of your screen, you come to Canvas like normal. If you look, there is a link there that says Echo Poll registration. Register for Echo Poll that way. And then when I see you guys, the same way we went through the slides, we're going to do that. But in between there are going to be some pop-up questions in there. You should be excited. We are a part of a testing group. Dr. Mac does not that she doesn't know how to say no, but I love to be a part of stuff like this to kind of fill out some of the kinks and kind of help. And so this is one of my mini pet projects that I'm doing. So I was one of the testing groups for Canvas itself. I had Canvas for a year before other people did. I didn't use Canvas with my students, but I was testing out Canvas well before Canvas was brought to us here on campus. But I say it to say we're doing it live, and I need your help. And so all you need to do is just register. When you register and I pull up the session, you'll be able to participate with the session. There'll be an email. They'll tell you what to do. Even if you watch this and you want to click on it, it'll tell you what to do from there. But the email is just telling you guys, hey, y'all, go register in order to be ready for class on Thursday. All right. If there is nothing else, can't be all. It's a recording. This is so random. I will see everybody on Thursday. Please remember to register for Echo Poll. And please also remember that the PowerPoint presentations for every single chapter, every single chapter that's on the course schedule, it's already there for you. You just need to review those slides. All right. Talk to you guys later. Have a wonderful day. Bye.